Most of you are aware about the changes that are happening in the real estate industry, specifically in the area of how commissions are being paid. The main purpose of this change is to separate buyer-broker commissions from the listing commissions. Basically, the idea is that buyer will pay their own agent and the seller will pay their own agent without any obligations to pay for the buyer's agent. Recently, I put a video that reviews these changes on conceptual level. There is a link to this video in the description of this video. Please follow the link and watch it. At the same time, many of my clients are asking questions about how exactly does it work. In this video, I'm going to review 3 agreements: buyer representation agreement, the listing agreement, and the purchase agreement. Let's jump right in. If I would be working with you, I would use Coldwell Banker version of buyer representation agreement. It's a relatively short document, just 2 pages. There is also a version by California Association of Realtors, and I'm absolutely sure that if you're going to work with an agent from a different brokerage, they may have their own version of this agreement. It starts with the name of the buyer, and in this example, I'm using my own name. By default, it's an exclusive agreement. It starts on the day when all parties are signing it. So here it says this buyer representation agreement begins on the date that all parties have signed it. It terminates, and here is a date that is not to exceed 90 days. January 23rd falls on 90 days from the day when I'm filming this video. The agreement also specifies the types of properties that we're going to search for. It can be as generic as single-family home in Santa Clara County, or it can be narrowed to a specific city, neighborhood, bedrooms, bathrooms, square footages, anything that you want to specify in order to make this search specific enough and will allow both you as a buyer and an agent to be on the same page in terms of the search criteria. Continuing down, this is the section that probably most people will pay attention to: commission to the broker. Notice that the amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between the parties and others. So this is just a suggestion. If we will work together, we'll talk about the exact level of compensation. But keep that number in mind because we will have to use it when we're going to look at the purchase agreement. The rest of it are other terms that specify rights and responsibilities of both parties. And by signing at the bottom of this agreement, the buyer and the agent are agreeing to work together, and it becomes a binding agreement for the period of time that's specified in paragraph 2. Now let's look at the listing agreement. Here I'm also using version of Coldwell Banker. Again, different brokerages may have their own versions, and there is a California Association of Realtors version of this agreement. Again, I'm using my own name as the client name, and I'm using my office address just as an example. Here, the difference between this agreement and buyer-broker agreement that you have to specify the starting date, and I put October 23rd of 2024. And list price, it's also necessary to make this agreement a valid document. 1.9 million currently is a median sale price for Santa Clara County for single-family homes, and that's the number I'm using in this example. Responsibilities of the parties, paragraph 4 specifies the buyer-broker commissions, and again, the same notice that the amount of commissions is negotiable. Just remember, everything in real estate is negotiable. I'm using 2.5% as an example. Here is an interesting term. If buyer is not working with the buyer's broker and buyer remains unrepresented through the close of escrow, seller agrees to pay seller's broker at close of escrow in addition to commission described above, and I'm using it as an example, 2%. Paragraph 5, seller's payment to the buyer's broker. We were using 2.5% as buyer broker compensation, and we're using the same thing, the same number here. Basically, seller authorizes seller's broker, meaning Coldwell Banker and me, to convey to others, subject to the terms of seller's written agreement with buyers and or buyer's broker. Sellers agree to pay to buyer's broker directly a commission of total of 2.5%. What it means that it gives me a right to advertise and let other agents know that you're willing to cooperate on paying buyer broker commissions. Then continuing further down, we're skipping through a number of terms related to how the property is entered on MLS and how it's marketed. And again, there is a section with signatures. After signing the listing agreement, preparing the house, putting it on the market, and hopefully getting a lot of interest, finally you will start receiving purchase offers. And they're done typically on California Association of Realtors Residential Purchase Agreement form. Here it is on the screen. Again, I'm using the date when I'm filming the video as date prepared. I'm using my own names and the same address of my office as an example. Also, on the first page, you have to specify the brokers who represent each party. And then we're going into terms that probably are of the most interest to both the buyer and the seller. The first one is the price. And as I mentioned before, I'm using median home sale price for Santa Clara County single-family homes. The offer price is $1.9 million. The close of escrow is 30 days after acceptance, and that's typical. Depending on the lender the buyer is using, time period may be shorter, but we typically don't see anything over 30 days. And if it's an all-cash offer, you can specify here. It can be closed in as little time as 5 days, or maybe even 3. With the purchase price of $1.9 million, it comes to $57,000. That makes 3% of the purchase price. And it's common these days to agree to deliver this earnest money deposit into escrow within 1 business day. Loan amount, I assume 80%. And the balance on down payment and purchase total. Continuing down, here is the paragraph that we really have to pay attention to, G3. If it's marked, seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. And here it says California Association of Realtors form SPBB attached. Let's jump to that form. Seller payment for buyer's broker's compensation. They call it also a concession. This document is becoming a part of the purchase agreement, and here it says, the following terms and conditions are hereby incorporated and made a part of the purchase agreement. Dated, and the date is the same as on the first page of the purchase agreement. Addresses, names, and seller payment to buyer's broker, subject to paragraph 1B. We'll read it next. Seller agrees to pay buyer's broker, let's say 2.5%. Paragraph 1B is very important. Maximum seller payment obligation. Seller shall only be obligated to pay buyer brokers the lesser of the amount of specified in paragraph 1A, here is 2.5%, or the amount buyer is obligated to pay buyer brokers pursuant to their buyer representation agreement. If you remember, we specified 2.5% in the buyer representation agreement. So if the amount there would be, let's say, 2%, even though this document may ask for 2.5%, you're not obligated to pay more than that amount. And here in paragraph 2, buyer confirms that they have an active broker agreement at the time of submission of the offer. You also have right to request to see the buyer broker agreement. A delivery of buyer representation agreement that buyer authorizes buyer broker and if applicable escrow holder upon request to deliver to seller or seller's broker a copy of the portion of the buyer representation agreement identifying the compensation buyer has agreed to pay buyer's broker. Nothing is under the table, everything is super transparent. But let's go back to the purchase agreement and look at the rest of it. Understanding paragraph G3 is very important for both the buyers and the sellers. And here is why. Under the old system, buyer broker commissions were paid by the seller out of the proceeds of the sale. In effect, if the buyer is financing the purchase. Out-of-pocket expenses for buyer broker commissions were basically 0.5%. 2.5% buyer broker commissions with down payment of 20% comes down to 0.5%. Right now, the buyers potentially may have to come up with much more cash in order to pay for their representation. Using paragraph G3 allows to roll these commissions again into the purchase price and will make it easier for buyers to finance the purchase and to satisfy requirements for the loan. For the sellers who understand that, it may be beneficial because when they cooperate, they will widen the pool of potential buyers and will help more people to bid for their homes, get more competition, and hopefully higher price. What you really need to focus on as a seller is your net proceed of sales, not the purchase price. After G3, we're going to section H, verification of all cash, down payment, and loan application. By default, these documents should be attached. For loan application, there are different levels of pre-approval. Most common is the pre-approval level. So some of the documents are submitted to the lender, but not everything. If the buyer would spend additional time and submit all documents to the lender as if they're getting a loan today, in a lot of cases, they get a fully pre-underwritten pre-approval, and that can shorten the closing period from 30 days to, in most cases, 15 days or even less. The buyer is entitled to final verification of property condition within 5 days prior to close of escrow. What it means that buyer has a right to go back to the house and make sure that it's in the same condition as when it was marketed to them. Assignment requests are not very common. We're not going to look into that. Now let's look at the contingencies. The first one is loan contingency. The default is 17 days, and if possible, we recommend to shorten it. Talk to your lender about the period that they can support. It may be 12 days or maybe even shorter, maybe even 7 days, depending on the state of your file. Appraisal contingency is to some extent connected to the loan contingency. If you are getting a loan, your home should appraise to the amount of the agreed upon purchase price or close to it in order for you to get the loan and purchase the house. Then you have contingency to investigate the property. You probably know that it is common in our area that the seller prepares property inspection, termite inspection, in some cases roof or foundation inspection, and all the owner disclosures before they put home on MLS. And you should be able to review it even before you prepare this purchase agreement. It is common to shorten this period of time or even completely waive it. One of the recent additions to this contingency section is insurance. It is critical to verify that your home is insurable, especially if you are buying in the high fire danger or in a flood zone. The cost of insurance may change your decision whether or not you want to buy this property. Another important one is common interest development contingency. If you're buying a home within a homeowner association, it may be a single family home, condominium, or townhome, it is critical to understand the financial health of the association and make sure that there are no rules that will prevent you from enjoying the property. For some people, it may be pet rules, whether or not you can have your animal living with you on the property. Reviewing of leased items is related mostly to solar panels in our area. Some solar panels are owned, some are leased, and if you're buying a home, you have to be able to take over the lease or buy out the solar panels at the time of purchase. And keep in mind, if you're thinking about buying out the solar panels, it can be paid by the seller or it can be paid by you. Time of possession is upon notice of recordation. At the end of escrow, the title company releases the documents for the recording at the county. And when the county records the sale, then you can get the keys to the house. You are officially becoming the owner. Now let's jump to the next important section. Items included and excluded from sale. Stoves, ovens, stove and oven combos, typically included with sale. Refrigerators are considered to be plug-in appliances and may or may not be included with the sale. Wine refrigerators, washers, dryers are also plug-in appliances, microwaves, video doorbells, and things like TVs and TV brackets can be included or excluded from sale. And if you want some items to be removed from the property prior to close of sale, you need to check one of these boxes and specify what you want to be removed. Maybe an old jacuzzi that you don't want to take over has to be removed from the property. Then we're going into section of allocation of cost. Typically, the seller pays for natural hazard disclosures, and the rest is customary. You have to check with your agent and title company depending on which county you are buying in, Santa Clara, San Mateo, Alameda, or Contra Costa, or wherever else you are. The cost may be split in different ways. Another item that may affect net proceeds from sale is home warranty if the buyer is asking you, the seller, to pay for it. If the buyer is asking seller to pay, here you should specify the amount, let's say $650. If entered like this, it means that home warranty plan chosen by buyer will be purchased by seller at the amount not to exceed $650. I would recommend reviewing the rest of the agreement with your agent and maybe with a real estate attorney to understand all the terms that you are agreeing to in this contract. To summarize, both the buyer and the seller should have their respective agreements for their representation and set the level of compensation for their respective agents. So buyer should have an agreement with their buyer's agent, and the seller should have an agreement including level of compensation, level of commissions with the listing agent. Purchase agreement allows buyers to ask sellers for help to pay buyer broker commissions. Because lending industry cannot roll buyer broker commissions into the amount of loan today, it may be helpful for the seller to agree to these terms and to help buyers to pay for their representation. This is Michael Talis with the Talis team. If you are thinking about buying or selling a home within a year or even two, let's get together on phone or on Zoom to talk about what it takes to successfully complete a purchase or a sale of your home. My contact information is in the description of this video. Keep in mind that I'm available in the evenings and on weekends. I'm looking forward to connecting with you. Till next time.